Hello, everybody. It's a big pleasure to be again with all Poultry School audience. We have a very, very nice guest today, Dr. Casey Owens. She is professor at the University of Arkansas in the Poultry Science Department, and she will bring this live webinar to you guys. And as always, this will be in our social media, so you can see it. And the most important thing is we like practical and accessible knowledge. So Dr. Casey will be presenting pre-slaughter factors affecting poultry meat quality. Dr. Casey, thank you very much for the time and thank you very much for the effort and sharing your knowledge with Poultry School audience. So the time is yours, Dr. Casey. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for the invitation to participate in the Poultry School and share this webinar with you and with all of your audience. So today I just want to talk about really poultry meat quality. I feel like that's my life, and I'm going to try to concentrate on those pre-slaughter factors that affect poultry meat quality. So that's a lot of where my research program is. I've got some things more on the processing side. I might share a few of those things towards the end, but the majority of the focus will be on these things that these factors that come from the live production area that affect quality. So to start with, I always like to try to start with stats that, the world chicken market is very strong. It's really the most widely consumed meat in the world. If you look at the different countries that are producing the most, you'll see that USA, Brazil, China has some to a degree. But we do have different a good amount of production in the Latin American countries and so forth. So doing a lot of production across the world and exporting from those countries as well to others. To give you a little bit of perspective from the U.S. poultry market, this is this slide really represents, first of all, the shaded area represents the per capita consumption in the U.S. And you'll see that there's been a drastic increase over the years from the 1960s to the present time. It stopped in 2020, but just think about that continuing. So it's really increased over the years, and even in the time that I've been around and associated with the poultry industry, which has been the last 30 years, it's probably doubled in size since then. The lines that you see on this graph are really representing the different forms of how we market the product here in the U.S. And I've talked to audiences in various countries over the years, and I still like to share this graph because even though some countries may not be marketing their products in these various market segments and to this degree, they may eventually get there as their industries modernize. So what I mean by that is we've got this whole bird market that's represented by this orange line. I've got my arrow hopefully on that you can see. So from 1960 to 1990, there was a big decline in that whole bird market and still continued to decline in the last, from 1990 to 2020, or excuse me, 2000. It's remained steady here in the U.S. from that time on. And a lot of that has to go with a lot of these products will go into rotisserie type chickens that are sold at the grocery store and so forth. But why is it decline? It's because we've modernized that poultry industry and really saw a big significant increase in the cut-up market, really from the 1960s to 1990. And then we, at the same time, we're seeing an increase in further processed products. So it's kind of boneless products, making products like chicken nuggets or breast fillet that would be marketed as a chicken sandwich or fried chicken, whatever the case, the further processed items. We're also on the incline from really the 70s to the present, and that really took over the parts market in around 2000. So in the U.S., we have a pretty modern market, and we are marketing all forms, but the most of what we're doing is in that further processed market, although the parts market is still fairly strong. In countries perhaps like at Mexico and Colombia, they may just be further back in, in if you take a snapshot back in this area where they still have a pretty significant whole bird market and parts market, but the further processing is a little bit lagging. So the market trends also, if I think about the bird sizes that have been processed in the U.S., those have changed pretty significantly over the years. So I know this is a busy graphic, but I wanted to try to talk my way through this with you. So if you think about this blue area of these bars, this is what we consider kind of that real small bird. And a lot of times this small bird is going into a whole bird market that might be sold as retail, maybe rotisserie, but also into restaurants like KFC or Popeyes that are selling parts whole fried chicken. All right, so they rely on that smaller bird, for example. And so it's remained pretty steady over the years, really since 2000 in terms of the percent of the market. There's been a little bit of decline in more recent years, but fairly steady. If you look at this bird that's kind of represented in this 5.2 to 6 pounds, I'm sorry, I'm talking in pounds today, it has decreased significantly since 2010, so very small percentage of the market in current time. The bird that's about 6 to 7.5 pounds has remained fairly steady. So you see that the amount of birds produced in that market is about the same over all those years. But what has increased in more recent times is the production of this really big bird, and that's greater than 8.5 pounds. And so in 20 years ago, we didn't have that particular market segment represented. So we've moved to a large bird market. It's remained steady, and that big bird heavy debone market has grown, and that really supports the further processing market, for example, in the United States. So production has significantly increased over the past few decades, and that's production that we're producing here in the U.S. and around the world, really. How is it increased? How has the industry overall worldwide been successful in increasing that? Well, one, there's modernization of the industry, all right? So processing helps. If we have automation within that, then we can produce more birds and so forth. Consumer demand, that's important, all right? Consumers do like chicken, but why do they like chicken? It's affordable, it's versatile. In the U.S., for example, we really like breast meat. So you've got consumers that like to eat chicken tenders, and that's all that's on the menu at some of these restaurants. And they can pick just that piece, right? So it's versatile. You can produce it into like a hot dog top form or a whole form or a deli loaf or whatever. It's also very affordable, and that's really across the world. And that's one of the reasons, the big reason that the consumption has increased globally and why we're the number one meat. The bird, that has changed over the years. We've always see improvement in genetics and nutrition, which makes those birds more efficient. And so by them being more efficient in terms of putting more meat on during their shorter growth period, that makes that production affordable because it's efficient. And then also poultry industry contributes to the economy. So that's good for people and so forth. So in terms of, I said that we've moved to further processing. This really just kind of gives you a snapshot of the various products. When I say that we're doing more further processing, and that generally occurs a lot more in modern markets. We start off, back in the 60s, we just had the whole bird market, and before that, there might have been a live market. But we moved into the parts, maybe boneless breast meat, as we're modernizing that. Hey, it's efficient for that processing plant to debone that product early or at the plant, and the consumers are willing to pay more for that. But now we move into further processed products. We've got nuggets, deli loaves, a portion piece of chicken for a sandwich, pre-cooked wings, for example, or the chicken sandwich that we see in fast food markets. Genetics and growth rates have changed significantly over the years as well. So this picture's kind of been around social media in recent years, and also this publication by Sweetoff in 2014. But what we note is that from the 1957 birds, and this is representing 2014, but you can easily say it's similar today, that bird really has quadrupled in size at a given age period. So 0.9 kilograms to 3.6 kilograms. Now, if you look at the average bird weight, and I don't think I have that represented in this particular presentation, but in the U.S., if you look at that average bird weight, that's really doubled or more, a little bit more over the last 40 to 50 years. But that also takes the average of all those different market segments that we supply for. So what are the challenges? Quality, all right, I worry about quality, and that's what I study and so forth, and that's a big thing on my mind. What are the things that impact quality? They can be production effects, they can be processing impacts, and then also further processing technologies. I'm going to spend most of my time on production effects, but I'll hit a few things on the other two as well. So what are the major issues from live production that affect saleable meat? Saleable meat, you could say that could be quality too, although saleable meat is a quantity issue. However, if you can't produce that meat because of some defect, you've got lower quality and you've had to discard that. And so they kind of go a little bit hand in hand. So we're going to kind of go through those things. These issues that impact economic losses are a variety of things. You could have bruises, inflammatory process. Those things can result in condemnation at times when they're real severe. Broken bones or exposed flesh, those can equate into downgrades. Low weight would affect yield. A dead on arrival would obviously affect yield because you don't have that to process. And then meat quality, we'll talk about some of these things like woody breast and pale soft and exudated meat. Those things will impact quality, but also have impacts on yield as well. All of these things can really hurt the bottom line and decrease the profitability and impact those economic losses. So carcass quality and quantity are both important because a lot of these things can impact both things. So what are the things that are occurring in that pre-slaughter environment? I'm going to kind of cover some of these in the next several points. Antemortem stress. So stress on the bird is important from a welfare standpoint. We want the birds to not have as much stress on them. From that aspect, that we want humane handling, humane processing, humane live production, and so forth. But birds can be stressed, and not all of that stress is bad. However, the big stresses that can have an impact on the bird's health or quality of the product in the end can be an example of thermal stress. So heat stress is a big one. Heat stress can impact that muscle metabolism, and that can result in changes in the final product quality in the end. Flock health. If you have respiratory disease or other metabolic diseases that are occurring, that can cause stress to the bird and then also result in loss of that product and so forth. And then any trauma, if you have birds that are piling up in the house that can cause trauma to that bird, you may lose the bird or have impacted quality. So it affects carcass and meat quality, affects quantity and yield, and affects animal welfare, especially when you get the dead on arrival. Paw quality is very important. They're very valuable products. The Asian countries are big consumers of chicken paws and chicken feet, and so it's a big value to them, and it helps with our industry here in the U.S. and other countries as well. So if we just lost those and went to rendering, we'd lose significant economic value there. So what are the things that we worry about? That's foot pad health. All right, so this picture illustrates foot pad burns or that contact dermatitis on the foot. And obviously, if you get some of that in like the later 3 stages of this severity, then this would not be an acceptable product to put, for example, in this soup. So paw quality is important. It's also an indicator of animal welfare. And so if you have more severe foot pad burns, then that's going to be an indicator that something's going wrong in the house and that those conditions need to be improved by having more ventilation to dry out that litter or to remove that ammonia and so forth. In terms of how this occurs, there are age and weight effects. Typically, males will have more of a problem than females, and the problem can increase with increasing age. So as the birds get heavier, a little bit less mobile, they're not moving as much, and so forth. But you can manage this with nutrition and litter conditions. So, for example, again, the ventilation in the house will help keep that that litter drier, and then also to eliminate or to remove that ammonia. So keeping on top of those, live production management practices is going to be very important in efforts to reduce the impact of this particular quality issue. Inflammatory process or infectious process, sometimes known as cellulitis also. This is another aspect that can occur in the live production setting, but we see it in the processing plant. And this is the definition of it is really lesions that occur under the skin. So you kind of see us in the inside here. It results in the thickening of the skin. So you kind of see a darker area. There's some at this location, and then this middle picture, this is kind of a thickening of that dermis area. It starts with a scratch on the bird, typically, and then that scratch gives it an area for microbes to enter that body. And so this yellow plaque-like lesion that occurs really is the body's defense mechanism, and it's really trying to wall off that bacteria so that it doesn't, contaminate the bird further. However, in the processing plant, this would have to be trimmed out and so forth. Still a good product, but there may be parts that could be condemned depending on the severity of this. So it does lead to downgrades, for example, if you are trimming that out, or condemnations, and then that affects the consumer product, or affects the amount of product that you can put out, because hopefully you're catching that in the processing plant. But it is a significant problem in certain places. This bottom picture is a product that was cooked, and I think it was at one of the fairs, kind of a festival type of event here in the United States, and you see all this yellow plaque-like area in the interior of that meat. Obviously, that's not going to be acceptable to the consumer, and it's I wouldn't want to come across that. And so we're trying to catch these things at the processing plant before it ever makes it out to a consumer. Now, this problem is manageable with nutrition, litter conditions, and also management practices. So if you get that litter too dry, that can result in scratches, or if the birds are crowded, then that can also lead to scratches on the birds. And so things of that nature, anything we can do to help reduce scratches on the bird where we have an opportunity for microbes to enter those scratches and so forth would help improve this condition. This condition will usually, when you see it in the plant, has occurred just a few days prior to processing as well. Other skin integrity issues, so the first two are really kind of skin integrity as well. If you have weakened skin or tissue such as skin, it can lead to also intestinal tears. So you may even have a weakened intestinal wall. And so that can result in some intestinal tears at processing, which would then lead to cross-contamination in the plant. So birds are usually off of feed. Try to have 8 to 12 hours prior to processing so that we can have all the gut content be evacuated. But the longer the birds are off feed, that intestinal tissue also sloughs off, and that weakens the intestine. And so in that case, those intestines will have more of a chance to tear also during processing. So if you can avoid excessive feed withdrawal times, that can help improve that situation. But also when you do have excessive feed withdrawal times, you're also continually losing yield during that time period. Okay, moving on. The next issue is green mussel disease. This is a condition that develops in the antemortem period. Usually Um, Within the week prior to processing, it's stressed from handling of the bird. So if that bird gets real active, starts flapping its wings, you may see more of this. So if the lights go out or the feed goes out and the feed is delivered and the birds get really active, then you may see an increase in incidence of this at the processing plant. Basically, what happens is that this is the pectoralis minor, or the tenderloin that lies underneath that pectoralis major, or the breast fillet. And so when the breast fillet contracts, or let me take that back. When the pectoralis minor, the tenderloin contracts, it will swell. If it doesn't have much room to have that swelling or that contraction, then especially in that time where you get a really fast contraction, then you can get breaking of those vessels in that tender. And so if that happens and that those vessels can't repair, then it leads to necrosis of that tender. And that's why it's green, because you've had rupturing. You'll see the pictures below. 2 to 3 days post stress, you see hemorrhaging. But as that hemorrhaging resolves, it turns green because it's just a breakdown of those blood components. And also, if you don't have the ability to repair if the vessels were not repaired by the body, then that tender will also atrophy, so they'll shrink. It's really necrosis, that tissue is dying. In terms of incidence, and I'll base this in the U.S., we see up to 20% of incidence in flocks. It can occur at any size or weight, but will tend to be more frequency at those higher weights. If we can reduce the stress, especially wing flapping, that can help manage this issue a little bit better. All right, moving on to some more meat quality issues. This one's about called pale, soft, and exudated meat. This is related to stress prior to processing, and really stress in the prior couple of weeks before processing. Heat stress is a big one that can result in problems in this PSE in meat. So what is PSE meat? It's really the loss of the ability of that muscle to bind water, or those proteins to bind water. So therefore it creates soft and stringy texture. And then that color of the raw meat is pale. And so I'll give you an example here. This top picture in the middle is 2 turkey lobes, 2 turkey breast fillets. And the one here on the right is much paler in color across the board compared to the one here on the left. And in broiler fillets, we can also see instances of this, where this fillet on the left is much paler overall in color compared to the one on the right. What you see behind these 2 fillets are the amount of drip loss that has come off these fillets that are about equally sized. So we have a loss of water holding capacity. The proteins are damaged where they can't really hold on to water, that water that's in the muscle. So when we add products like PSE meat into further processed products, like a deli loaf is a product that we're typically going to inject and try to extend. Maybe 20% of a marinade we'll put in there. If those proteins are damaged and they can't hold on to water, then when they cook it, then you're going to have this purge that just seeps out of the product. You can kind of see it here, you'll see it in this location, and so forth. And so it really affects water holding capacity, and then therefore that impacts yield. So what's really happening in the meat? One, again, heat stress can induce this situation, and it causes a fast decline in muscle pH in the early postmortem period. And as a result, the proteins will have kind of a shrinkage of the myofibers, so that muscle cell. All right, so shrinkage of that, and so there's less space for water to be held within that product. And when that happens, water comes out into extracellular spaces. That extracellular water is very easily lost in drip loss and cook loss and so forth. The picture on your left is more like what you would want, where it looks darker in color. It's because more water is held within that fiber. And so that is going to remain in the meat much longer and through the just normal storage, and also cook loss to some extent. Okay, moving on to myopathies. We've seen these in the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, well, more than 10 years, at least 15 years, in the poultry industry. They're really growth-related myopathies. They show various histological lesions. So I've got some slides of histology over here on your right. This is normal tissue in this first box on your left. You look at white striping in a moderate case on your right. What you start seeing is the fibers are starting to degenerate. All right. So as this progresses, that fiber will kind of disappear. And then you've got the next in this middle section, we've got white striping, severe case. You can see that there's lots of absence of muscle fibers, and there's some heterophils and so forth in there, inflammatory cells that are trying to clean things up. This is next picture on your right in the middle is white striping and woody breast. And what you'll see is lack of muscle fibers, but you see all of this stuff in the middle. The stuff that is the areas that are stained with this purple stain is connective tissue. So all of this area is filled up with connective tissue. Woody breast severe and below is another instance of woody breast severe. Again, let me talk you through this one. All of this kind of purple area is connective tissue. So you've got lots of muscle fibers. These clear cells are fat cells. So you're going to see an increase of fat there. So these histological changes are occurring in meat and representing or leading to things that we actually see and feel in the end product, that breast fillet. So I've got white striping, woody breast, and spaghetti breast, and I'm going to talk more about those. So white striping was really first noticed, I guess, in the late 2000s. We see this in varying degrees of severity. So you kind of have normal product on the end, but as you move up, these white striations start to appear and start becoming more prevalent throughout the fillet. That's what you see in a very high scored product. All those white striations are throughout the fillet, and it's very noticeable to a consumer and so forth. We collected a bunch of data a couple of years ago on this is data that represents 4 different strains, and you see that as the birds are growing and getting bigger, that white striping will tend to increase in severity. That means that we're going to start seeing more fillets that are on this right-hand side versus the ones on the normal left-hand side. So it all increases. In this particular data, there wasn't much difference between or among the strains that we processed. A few different points as you could see, but in general, it's just increasing as the birds get bigger. Woody breast is the next one. Again, here's another example of those histological changes. We've got lots of connective tissue among the muscle fibers that have degenerated. Here's some fat cells in the middle and so forth. But what's interesting about this condition is you've got this fillet looks a little bit different, but when you touch it, it's very hard to touch. So this is a woody breast fillet on your right, a normal fillet on your left. This picture is illustrating it's got like a 200-gram weight sitting on top of the fillet, and you'll see that there's no compression. There's a little bit of space between that weight and the fillet. In the normal one, it has no problem having a little bit of compression and making full contact with that fillet. It's because it's very flexible in nature. So we can score woody breast in varying degrees of severity too. These are fillets that were hot bone. That's why they look a little bit darker. But we go from normal all the way up to severe. And as you move through this scale, the hardness of this cranial or to upper region of the fillet increases, and it also starts to move down the fillet so that when you're up at a 2 or even a 3 scored product, it's very firm throughout the whole fillet. These are fillets, these same fillets are laying on the side of a table, and basically when you get out to this 3, that it's really sitting flat and there's no flexibility in that fillet. So we can use hand palpation to develop the scoring system, but there are instrumental means where we can compress it with that has a force, with a tool that has a force meter on it, and that has very good correlation to our hand palpation scores. So here's just some of that data. This is just a tool that will compress this fillet about 20% in this case, and it gives me a force reading. And so the data that you see here on the right is that, hey, at day 0, there's already a difference of those fillets that we selected as normal, mild, or severe. So there's a difference in that compression force. These A's and B's are represented of differences across the days, but there are significant differences in all 3 of these populations. But what you'll note is that the compression force typically decreases as the fillet ages. Now, with that said, the histology doesn't really change. There's still a lot of connective tissue and fat within those fillets and those severe products. So that says to me that the quality is not necessarily changing. It's just that the raw nature is becoming less hard over time, potentially due to loss of water and just some postmortem changes that are occurring in the muscle. So how's woody breast occur in the bird? So they've got a couple of slides here on the left that represent male and female, those that are processed at a smaller bird weight and moving on up. And so typically we're seeing an increase in woody breast as the birds get bigger. And that's across different strains. There are some high yielding strains that have a little bit higher degree of woody breast compared to standard yielding strains. The graphic that you have on the left here that I'm showing, if you'll take note of the red bar areas, this is just a percentage of severe fillets within a population. Again, I apologize that I've got this in pounds, but if you're over that, I think this is 2.7 to 3 kilograms. Once you start going above that, you're really starting to increase the amount of severe product that you note over time. So this condition increases as the birds grow, and more so when you have a high breast yielding strain. So what are the effects of meat quality from woody breast and white striping? We get a decreased water holding capacity, and really this is occurring because we have myofibrillar protein loss. Remember, degenerative fibers, that means loss of protein. So with pale, soft, and exudative meat, we really just had denaturation of proteins. I didn't explain that a whole lot, but the proteins are still there. They're just not as functional because they've lost some of the ionic strength and so forth. In this case, we've lost myofibrillar protein, and so that results in a loss of water holding capacity. That means we get increased cook loss, increased drip loss associated with these products. Shear is a way to measure toughness or tenderness. It's not always impacted. It's not the same as getting a contractile toughness to that fillet. And I can explain that a little bit later as we go on. I will say that the texture is very complex though. So it can have a crunchy nature. So if you're eating through that cooked product, it can have a crunch to it. And really, you'll see this picture can maybe help illustrate that. You see a lot of fibrous nature to it, but if you think about all of the connective tissue that is in the woody breast meat, then you're kind of hitting layers of connective tissue versus protein, myofibrillar protein, connective tissue, myofibrillar protein. That may give you that crunchy type of texture. And that's what's not appealing to the consumer. So that's more of a concern. In terms of composition, there is a decreased amount of protein, increased amount of fat, especially if you have white striping, and increased moisture. And then we start seeing an increased amount of insoluble collagen associated with it as well. Now, we've used woody breast in further processed products. That crunchiness, if you're eating like a whole muscle product, then that can be very apparent. But what if we divert that product, the most severe product, and put it into other further processed items? We've done some studies to look at this. And while we do see some impacts of incorporating severe woody breast into products like a deli loaf or a patty, the effects are not nearly as great as if you were eating just that whole muscle product. So we can kind of mask those effects. And also, you would not likely have 100% severe formulated product. You probably have a mixture of some severe and some normal and mild within a particular product, which would again then kind of lessen the effects of that woody breast in that product. In terms of cooking, though, what we have noticed is that it takes a little bit shorter time to cook woody breast. And the concern there is if you are producing a lot of product in a processing plant that's doing further processing and they're cooking that product, or in a restaurant, for example, if they're cooking from raw to finished product and they're using a thermometer and they happen to get a product that has got a high degree of woody breath and it's reached the internal temperature, if you have a normal counterpart fillet, it may not have reached that temperature yet. So there is potential for um, undercooking some normal product in certain cases. So that's just something to be aware of. It takes a little bit longer time for normal muscle to meet that appropriate endpoint temperature. Okay, let's move on to spaghetti breast real quick. Spaghetti breast is another problem that we've kind of started to see this in the last 10 years. This is really where we see a real soft muscle texture, real fibrous in nature. We start seeing it in the cranial region, especially in the younger birds, but it can get to an extreme nature where you see the whole fillet is kind of falling apart. In terms of incidence, I would say it could occur to incidence of up to 20%, results in a soft texture when you cook the product. We have seen more of a prevalence of this in more recent years for whatever reason. Have we made some progress on the genetic side of woody breast that maybe it's kind of started seeing this problem as a result? Females will typically have a little bit more than males. And then in this graph below, what you'll notice is that the spaghetti breast incidence will tend to increase really early when those bird sizes are smaller. And then it reaches around 2.7 kilograms or so as kind of the peak incidence of that issue. And then it starts to decrease as that bird size gets bigger. And so there's still a lot of research to do in this particular area. Some schools of thought are that the collagen is not well organized and it results in this integrity issue. Another case is like, hey, is it the point at where we had that fiber degeneration and loss of integrity early on before that collagen and fat move in? Are we capturing it there? But I do think that there could be an issue with collagen, the collagen matrix, that could be leading to some of this end result of the fillet. There was a good study out of Canada recently. Dr. Chi and Dr. Barboot presented this work where they looked at various products. And this is really just trying to show you in a population of fillets, where is woody breast, white striping, and spaghetti breast occurring. And what they found is that about a third of these fillets, kind of here in the middle, all overlap. A third of the fillets have some incidence of all three types of myopathies. About half of the fillets, represented by this 4,500, have woody breast and white striping. And so there is a lot of overlap between these myopathies for the fillets that we see. And you'll see that there's very few normal. So we do see myopathies in a significant proportion of fillets that are in the marketplace. All right, let me shift gears a little bit to tenders because I think tender quality is important. Here in the U.S., we do have restaurants that all they do is sell tenderloins or those tenders. And so they've had a concern about the fraying tenders. And here's an example of a fried piece of chicken where it's been frayed. And so now you have an odd looking piece of meat that you're going to serve to a consumer. This top picture just illustrates some of that fraying that will occur. And in the most severe cases, it's kind of disintegrated and it's very soft to the touch. In the bottom picture are some tenders that have different levels of hardness. So, is it the same as woody breast? That's still unknown to this point, but we are trying to track some of this tender quality. So we're starting to see feathering, fiber separation. Is it because the fibers are getting bigger? And that usually occurs as the birds get older and bigger fillets or bigger tenders, the fiber diameter increases. And does that change the architecture of the muscle? Is there some PSD meat PSD situation, that pale, soft, and exudative, where you get some protein denaturation that could be leading to some of these problems? We do see some white striping in some of these tenders at times. or can it have some of the similar characteristics that we see in woody breast fillets, for example, some of the fiber degeneration? There is a connective tissue layer that usually is on top of this muscle called the epimysium. When we cut this tender off of the frame, that epimysium gets cut, and sometimes that will roll back off the tender. When that happens, this tender becomes a lot more fragile as well. So some processing conditions can make this problem worse. Okay, I just wanted to hit on a couple of other quality issues. This is more so of issues in the plant. But what are the problems with breast deboning? So in the U.S., we debone quite a bit of breast meat. It's used in further processing. Consumers like to eat breast meat here in the U.S., for example. So broken bones or bones within that boneless product are important because they're a hazard to consumers. So we will use X-ray vision scanners to help reduce that incidence or identify that so that somebody can trim that out. Yield is important. So if we're deboning product, we want to have maximum amount of yield that we can get off the frame, get that meat off the frame. And so training is going to be important in that aspect. And then tenderness can be impacted. So if you're used to aging a carcass 6, 8, 12, 24 hours before you were to debone it, then you may have very tender product. But when you shorten the aging period and say, oh, I'm going to debone right out of the chiller at approximately 2 or 3 hours postmortem, then that tenderness will decrease as represented by the increased shear value. So it's kind of backwards. That is because before 4 hours postmortem, there's still energy in the muscle. So the deboning process by cutting the fillet can cause the muscle to contract. It can still react to that cutting process early postmortem. And that shortens the sarcomeres. So the sarcomere is the individual basic contractile unit of the muscle. And that contracts and it stays contracted throughout cooking and so forth. And so in that case, the person would be biting through more muscle fibers, and that's why it makes it more tough. Okay, so what are other production effects, the challenges that we have, those production effects on meat quality? So I get questions quite a bit about the genetic strain or gender effects. There are big and small bird programs, all right, so those can potentially have some impacts, but sometimes that interaction with processing practices. So how fast are they going through rigor, or how big is that bird, and are they being chilled appropriately, or those larger birds take longer to chill? So there's a variety of things that can have an impact due to those interactions. Myopathies, the production practices, we got to think about welfare practices impact. Are some things that we're doing or not doing impacting welfare and then subsequently meat quality? There can be nutritional effects on the bird. That means diet density or feed additives for growth and health. Antioxidants that are added may help improve some meat quality issues and so forth. It's a whole other area that I'm not really covering here today, but there can be impacts of all of these things on meat quality. So I'm going to hit on a few notes on opportunities that we can do in processing, kind of to wrap up this presentation. Just a few more slides. One, woody breast has been a big issue. So how can we detect that to allow processors to sort that? There's different research that's going on with the use of imaging of that breast fillet. So this is looking at kind of the bend shape or the bend angle or bend energy that occurs. So an image of that fillet. With this one that's being held straight out is very woody, and this other normal breast has lots of flexibility. And so digital cameras can capture that image and do sorting based on that. With artificial intelligence being more prevalent these days, you can apply some statistical models and machine learning to those apparatus to get successful sorting. We did a project when we looked at the grading of carcass region and the shape of that. So we noticed that the really fleshed out bird, the one has more of a U shape at the top, tended to have more woody breasts, versus some that are more heart-shaped or have come to a point at the breast. So these birds typically would result in normal fillets, whereas the ones that are severe woody breast fillets would have more of that U shape. And so we apply digital imaging to that to have some predictions for carcass sorting. Sorting at the carcass level or identifying at the carcass level can give us information that can go back to live production, but it could also inform a processing plant of issues that might be coming down the line as they prepare to debone. Other things that have been used for detection methods for woody breast, because it has been quite an issue in our industry, is near infrared technology and hyperspectral imaging. So some of those things are ongoing in research. Woody breast is lower in protein and higher in moisture, and near infrared, for example, and then even hyperspectral imaging can use NIR to detect muscle composition, and that was one mechanism on how they sorted that product. There may be a couple of plants in the U.S. that are using this technology. Hyperspectral imaging is kind of the next technology that people are studying for identifying woody breast. It can also look for foreign material, so it may have multiple uses. And we can use machine learning again for improved detection, and then combine those with sorting techniques. Robotics are being used a lot more in processing, so I'm just going to be very quick on this. It's not the goal of this particular presentation, but I just kind of want to show you some things that are occurring out there. Robotics are coming along in lots of different areas. This is a fillet that's being cut with robotics to give you the portions, sizes that a processor might need. But it can address employee relations, it can HR, ergonomics, food safety, dealing with labor. We have labor shortages here in the U.S., and we need automation that can address that. So examples, again, it might be putting a fillet in a package, selecting those fillets based on weight and putting those into a package, or again, portioning that particular product. Intelligent cutting as well. This is an example of some intelligent cutting. So deboning, if it's not automated, and there are some automated methods, but this is another one that's going to use robotics. It's still in development, but how can we mimic the human eye and be able to obtain the yield that we want while reducing the labor on humans? Oh, I think I'm going to skip this one for now. Excuse me on that one. Some chilling technologies. There's some things coming down the line in that one, because we are very interested in food safety, and so how can we make the process more efficient, get the the bird's temperature down more quickly, and help reduce pathogenic or microbial growth. And so we've got sub-zero saline chilling. That means we can get the temperature down much lower than traditional chilling. Rotational shackles. These shackles are going to move so that we get a little bit of action around the bird, so that we can get that heat transfer that's needed in chilling. So can it improve that chilling efficiency? Yes. Can it improve quality? And can it improve food safety? So those are the questions that are being answered in that technology. Okay. Oh, and then food safety is always going to be an issue, and so there's some things that are occurring in that technology. One, we're going to try to quantify pathogens and use that to develop strategies against pathogens in the processing plants, and even going back to pre-harvest. But in processing plants, we do need a multiple hurdle approach. That means we're going to have to apply interventions throughout the process to really get the microbial levels low, that can help increase shelf life, but also reduce the chance of causing foodborne illness. Okay. It is important, from going back to quality. So food safety is important, but a lot of those food safety interventions may have negative impacts on quality. And so it's important to still study the quality. And this is an older study. It's just showing antimicrobial effects. So it's like, hey, if we're adding a sodium lactate or a sodium diacetate, if we add those to product formulations, it can be detrimental to the quality of that product. So there's going to be a need for ingredient technologies to help overcome some of those issues with some of the acidic nature of those antimicrobials to help, again, get a quality product out in the end. And I just said that. So the final thoughts is that live production impacts, those nutritional and genetic can have impacts on meat quality, and the safety is also going to be important as we move down or continue with the poultry industry and that marketing of products and so forth. Understanding quality issues and developing mitigation strategies is going to be a must to help prevent defects on the live production side, minimizing those effects. So if we do have some of the problems still in the processing plant, how can we deal with that in the plant so that it's not getting out to the consumer? Innovations are going to be still important in the areas of poultry processing to help improve those efficiencies and quality in the final product in the processing plant. And then again, food safety is going to continue to be important. So with that, I'm going to finish. And
Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
So, Casey, thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
First of all, the presentation was very clear, and we appreciate that. And we love the material that is very practical to use. You mentioned that one of the factors is the practices. You can correct me. I feel, and talking with some producers, that patching and transportation from the houses to the slaughterhouse is a big impact sometimes. So, and do you think it's still a gap of watching progress, more robotics in that area, or how do you see that specific, say in that way, practice of catching birds because they are in a
Okay.
very nice catching the
Catching.
birds
Yeah.
and taking them to the slaughterhouse because they are very nice. They have been for in broilers for 40 days, nice cooling, water, meat, and then boom, stress. And they
Sure,
are
sure.
in a very stressful, let's say, environment since the moment that the catching start to the to all the time. So, what do you think of that?
Sure.
Let's say practice specifically.
Right. So, really about 25 years ago at least, really had an introduction of some of the automated bird harvesting machines. I've got some of those things in some, and when I'm teaching class, I talk about those. But these automatic bird harvesters are like equipment that goes in, and it's kind of attached to a conveyor system. And at the end of that conveyor, when it comes down to the birds, there's like these kind of rubber finger like objects that are kind of rotating and are bringing the birds up on the conveyor belt. That conveyor belt was then attached to the modules that go to the truck. And so that was all in efforts to reduce human handling. It's very good if you have labor shortages, but also from the welfare aspect. With that said, there were some early studies done to look at automated catching versus manual catch crews, and some would say one is better at this time, another would say the other is better at this time, and then some that would say there's no difference. And the metrics that were used there are dead on arrivals or downgrades in the plants, for example. With that said, it really came down to management. If you're not managing an automatic bird harvester very well, then you can still have problems. But it is an issue because if you don't want to crowd the birds when you do it, you don't want to get broken bones. Like if you're using manual catch crews, if you're catching too many birds in one hand, you might get more bruising or broken bones that can occur. And so having guidelines for those practices are going to be important. We have had some automatic bird harvesting equipment in this area in probably about 15 years ago, 15 to 20 years ago. They were tested in this area. I don't see very many of those in the area anymore, but we also have a good labor supply. So it kind of, there's things you just have to weigh on what is practical in terms of economics and welfare and yield of that bird. Management practices are going to be important though. Um, Heat stress on the bird. If it's in a hot summer month, how can you keep the birds cool through that
Yeah.
process of transportation? And then once you get to the processing plant, have some fans that are going that can blow across the bird. So no, it's definitely an area. I think I even Googled a search on some of these automatic bird harvesters. I think there's still a lot of research and development going into these areas. I think more of it's occurring in Europe than here in the U.S. But we do have a couple of equipment manufacturers here in the U.S. that are producing some of those. I just don't know how prevalent we are using those here in our locations. That doesn't mean that they're not used in other places, though. Hopefully that answered the
Okay,
question.
no, no, fantastic. So, Dr. Casey, thank you very much to our audience. We hope that this material is useful and we hope that you use this practical. Here in the screen is the contact of Dr. Casey. If you want to reach her
Yes,
directly, I
thank
think that she will be more than happy to support you. Dr. Casey, one more time, thank you very much for your time and see you in the next one. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Bye bye.